Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for taking the evening to join us. My name is Ronnie Lau, and I am a federal lobbyist with NEA's Government Relations team. So today we're going to talk about some of the common questions we've been receiving about public service loan forgiveness. Obviously, we've had some tremendous wins on this program in the recent months, and we've been doing these webinars a lot recently to help get as many of our NEA members and educators in the US to get their student debt forgiven. And it's truly a tremendous program that's made a ton of waves, but we've also noticed that there have been a ton of questions that come up in common occurrences from all our webinars. And so we really wanted to change the structure for this month around and really take some time to address some of the things that we have seen common through our webinar presentations and things that we have worked with constantly with our members as they navigate the PSLF process. Jeff, has the slide been advanced? I'm not seeing that on mine. There we go. Thank you. So a couple of housekeeping items, but before we start, I just wanted to start talking about our text program. So to see if you qualify for PSLF and to get the latest news, webinar invites, and different resources that we have around student debt, you can use NEA's text program. You can text student debt in one word, all caps, to 48744. This will prompt you all the way to a link to this form to fill out some basic information about determining whether you may or may not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And so this is something I recommend all of our NEA members to do. This is a really simple form, and they can propel you to all the different resources. And of course, like I said, all the different resources and news that comes out on this program and advances to it, you will get notices of all of this stuff. So this is really important. So again, you can just text student debt one word to 48744. And for those who are joining us that aren't NEA members, we really hope you consider joining us today. You can head to nea.org/join to learn more and join as a member of our union. So a couple of housekeeping items before we go into this agenda. I just want to introduce a couple of folks here that are on with me that will be assisting me through today. On with me is Jeff Burrett from our Office of General Counsel and Laura Petty as well. They are some of our fantastic members of our student debt team that have been doing some fantastic work with us. And so they'll be here to help me answer some of these common questions that we'll be going through this webinar, and also doing a lot of things on the back end as well. We also have members from our fantastic NEA member benefits team, Scott, Kish, Sean Mabey, and Teresa, and Kimberly. All four of them will be on the background, also assisting with questions that come through. We ask that anybody who has any questions during the time of the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom. That is the way that we'll be tracking and monitoring the questions that come through during the whole webinar. We won't be using the chat function at all to answer those questions. It's just an easier way for us to log this. And any questions that we don't get to live during the webinar, this allows us to log your question and answer them afterwards for a later time, which we will send to all recipients at the end of the webinar, including the recording of the webinar, so you'll have access to all the slides and what you may have missed during listening to the webinar. So just to talk through the agenda today, we will have a brief overview about public service loan forgiveness and the limited waiver. If you have joined us previously for a different webinar, we're going to spend a little bit more of an abridged version today on this, just because I think a lot of folks at this point know a lot of detail on it, and you guys are much more concerned about the different questions that you have about applying for PSLF and whether you qualify or not. Second portion is we'll be answering some of the 11 common questions around PSLF that we've noticed. When you registered for the webinar, we inputted a couple of boxes that you could check of different common questions that you might have, and those are the questions that we will be addressing. And then we'll also have a live answer Q&A based on audience questions selected from the Q&A box that I had mentioned earlier. The only last thing I'll add to is that all Q&A questions, we want to make sure that we're going to answer as many as we can, but we're going to answer those that are more general, that may apply to multiple audience members. So if it's something very, very specific to your individual situation, whether if your certain types of student loans qualify in terms of what types of student loans you have or what your payment count may be, things that go very nitty-gritty into your personal situation, we won't be answering those live, obviously, to keep your information confidential. And also that usually leads to more of a discourse back and forth, which we won't be able to assist you on the webinar. However, we will have a solution for you to use the Savvy tool, which is our great partners that we've done with Ember Benefits to help navigate some of those complicated questions. So we ask that any questions that you do ask, please be more general with them, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. So what is public service loan forgiveness? So PSLF is for short for it, and the promise of PSLF was simple. If you worked in public service for at least 10 years, and you also made 120 total student loan payments in your federal student loan payments, then all your federal debt was forgiven. Unfortunately, we know that this was much more complicated than that. When the Trump administration was administering it, there was far more denials than there were approvals to this process. The catch, of course, right here is then, like I mentioned, is that there are complicated rules to public service loan forgiveness eligibility. And that caused 90% of applications to be denied. And this was starting in 2017 when the first waves of applications start coming through. So from nearly around 2017 to almost about 2021, 2022, we've had a lot of denial rates in public service loan forgiveness. Those rules, though, that I mentioned that helped make things so complicated for our members to receive forgiveness, those were waived temporarily by the Biden administration. And those were introduced last November. And those are lasting now until October 31st, 2022. So what this means is that you need to submit a PSLF application before October 31st, 2022 in order to benefit from the temporary waiver. Simple as that. So let's talk about who is eligible for PSLF. You must be employed full-time, which is defined as 30 or more hours per week by a public service employer. And public service employers include all public school districts and public and nonprofit higher education institutions. So the important note here in the caveat is that it must be a public service employer, not your job title or position. So thus, if you're a teacher, if you're an education support professional or ESP, a specialized instructional support personnel, or a higher education faculty, including adjunct and contingent faculty, you do qualify for public service loan forgiveness. It does not, again, matter about what your job title is or what you do for your school district or what you do for your school or college or university. If they are your employer, then more than likely you qualify for public service loan forgiveness. This should apply to over 90% of our NEA members. So briefly, what do borrowers have to do before October 31st to go fully take advantage of the public service loan forgiveness waiver and get their debt forgiven? So you go to studentaid.gov/PSLF and you log in with your federal student aid ID, or you may have to create one and make sure your contact information is up to date. Your federal student aid ID or FSA ID is not the same as what your servicer login is. This is separate from what you probably normally use to pay off your student loans monthly. So definitely go to this website and create that FSA ID if you don't already have that. And the reason why we ask to make sure your contact information is up to date is because that is the direct way about how the Department of Education is going to reach you about public service loan forgiveness, how far you've gotten along in the program, and any forgiveness opportunities moving forward. Now, here's where we divvy off into kind of the 3 separate branch aspect of what you may need to do to further advance your progress for PSLF. So if you have a federal direct loan and have applied for PSLF, no further action is needed to benefit from the waiver. Federal direct loan is the only type of federal student loan that qualifies for PSLF, and that's why we mentioned that. Now, if you have a federal direct loan but have not applied for PSLF, you do need to apply for PSLF even if you haven't reached 120 payments or 10 years of service. We say that because in order to take advantage of the waiver and to make sure that you have the highest credit possible towards PSLF, and so you receive PSLF on time, you need to apply immediately to take advantage of the waiver. After October 31st, you won't have that same opportunity and you may be set back in that situation. So say you're working in public service for 9 years as an educator and you didn't apply. If there was any errors in some of those previous rules that we talked about earlier that made it so difficult for you to get PSLF, you may not have those 9 years of credit that is needed for PSLF if you didn't apply under the limited waiver. So we encourage that even if you haven't made 120 payments on your federal student loans or have provided 10 years of service, still apply for PSLF ASAP so you can take advantage of what the limited waiver is offering right now. And then finally, this may apply to a lot of folks. If you have a FFEL, which is a federal family education loan, or a Perkins loan, these 2 student loan types, federal student loan types, are older than federal direct loans. These student loans must be consolidated first before you apply for PSLF. Consolidation turns your loan into a federal direct loan, which allows it to qualify for forgiveness under PSLF. And after you consolidate your student loans, then you apply for PSLF before the waiver ends on October 31st. And to begin your application on PSLF, you can visit the studentaid.gov/PSLF, and you can use the Department of Education's PSLF help tool to go do that and begin this process. But we also have some help that we can provide you along the way if that is too complicated. So as I mentioned, NEA can help you along this process. We recognize that the PSLF help tool, while it has been an improvement in the past, still can be a very complicated process for our members and other public servants to apply. So what we did is that we partner with a great organization called Savvy, and every NEA member can get free help for applying for PSLF and answers to their very technical questions by going to neamb.com/savvy. And that goes to our student debt navigator tool. It's a great tool, like I said, I mentioned, that helps you get your PSLF application filed, and they'll lead you through the process in a much easier way. And there's also customer rep supports that can help answer some of your more complicated questions if you get lost in any portion of trying to apply for PSLF. And again, that is free for every NEA member. If you're not an NEA member, you can join by going to nea.org/join. We also have other resources and FAQs available at that link right there, nea.org/student-debt.support. There's a great FAQ document there that answers a ton of the questions that we're going through tonight, or some other common questions we've come across in the past. There's a multitude of different things that you can find that might be helpful here. And if you guys don't believe us that the Savvy tool does work, Emily Robinson, she is a Georgia high school teacher who got $21,000 in her student debt forgiven thanks to the PSLF waiver. There's a quote from there that she has a master's degree and she couldn't even figure out PSLF out, which I'm sure many of the folks here on with us are in similar situations. She was getting rejected and she had no idea why, but she noticed the help tool was in one of our magazine ads to one of our NEA Today magazines. And it turns out she was in the wrong type of repayment plan, and then the waiver helped benefit and kick her into action into getting that much dollars forgiven. So let's go to the FAQs now, which was what we wanted to spend most of the bulk of our time on today. So right now in the next panel, we'll see right here about which common questions we had included in our registration page earlier. And I would just recite those again, just to make sure. So if you have questions around anything like this, don't feel the need to put it in the question answer box, since we'll be going over these later. But anything else outside of these 11 questions that we have positioned, feel free to put those into the Q&A box and we'll get to those live. So again, I'm just going to leave this up for a little bit for folks to see if there's anything here that they might want to ask or had questions about previously. And again, we're going to get to these as we go through this webinar.
All right, Ronnie. Well, I think I'm going to take over asking the questions and leave the answers for you. You know, we did have a ton of interest in these specific questions, and I just can't reiterate enough what Ronnie said, which is that many of the questions I think people are already probably throwing in the chat or more aptly the Q&A, we hope, should be answered within these 11 questions, or at least many of them will. And the first one is right on top, one of the most important questions right now. Should I apply for the PSLF waiver if I haven't yet made 120 payments?
So the easy answer to this one, like I said, I mentioned earlier, is yes, you should apply for the PSLF waiver, even if you haven't made 120 payments right now. The big thing, again, as I mentioned, is that you have to apply for the waiver before October 31st right now, to making sure that you receive all the benefits of the limited waiver. If you wait to pass the limited waiver when it expires, you'll be subjected to the previous rules to what we were dealing with public service loan forgiveness before this, with the huge denial rates that we experienced before. So it is paramount for you right now to go submit a PSLF application. Even if you haven't, again, meet the threshold of 120 payments, if you want to receive PSLF in one day, please make sure you do it before October 31st. This will allow you to make sure that you get the highest credit amount of payments possible, making sure your loan payments are on, or your loans are consolidated and on track for the future, and that you're enrolled into the right repayment plan that provides continuing qualifying payments towards public service loan forgiveness. You need to do all this to make sure that you are on track so that it's there for you at year 10 and 120 payments. And again, you can complete a PSLF application form by going to the PSLF help tool on studentaid.gov/PSLF. Or again, if you're an NEA member, use our Savvy tool that can help you file your PSLF application using our Student Debt Navigator at neamb.com/savvy.
Hey, Ronnie, you've already said a number of times, or a few times you've mentioned the need to consolidate loans, which brings up the important question of how would one go about consolidating their loans?
Yep. So we have very specific directions here on this. And again, the webinar is being recorded and we will send that out to folks if you miss any portions of this. So why don't we go ahead and prompt the directions right here. So as you can imagine, a very common thing we're referring y'all to is to the Education Department's website, which again is studentaid.gov. And this, though, differently, you will complete a direct consolidation loan application. So through doing that application, you will select all of your student loans that say Perkins or FFEL, because as I mentioned earlier, those two types of student loans are older and don't qualify for PSLF unless they are consolidated. So you need to consolidate your Perkins and your FFEL loans beforehand, then you will apply for PSLF. You will select Mohila as your servicer after you select which loans you want to use. And that is because Mohila is going to be the student loan servicer that will be servicing the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program for the future starting in July. And we'll get into that in a little bit for our next question. And then you will need to select an income-driven repayment plan. There are 4 types. There's Repay, Pay, IBR, and ICR. These are all 4 income-driven repayment plans. And as I mentioned, income-driven repayment plans are the only types of repayment plans that qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So for the 120 payments that we mentioned earlier, you have to have income-driven repayment plans to count for that 120. Minus how the limited waiver works right now, where it's counting previous payments and helping you pass that loophole. But for the future, especially if you don't have 120 payments made, you will need to be an income-driven repayment plan for the future in any of those 4 options.
And Ronnie, I'm going to just jump in and point out that on studentaid.gov, there's a very clear kind of glossary of what these different programs provide and what the different terms are. So rather than spend time tonight going over those particular details, folks would be much better served going to studentaid.gov and looking them over themselves because they are quite nuanced.
Yep, great tip, Jeff. And the other thing I really want to stress is that there's no fee in submitting an application to consolidate your loans. You do not need to contact your student loan servicer or Mohila to do this. Oftentimes, we get a lot of concerns about folks that have said that they have been reached out by a service or an organization that is offering to help them consolidate their loans. And that involves some type of payment or some type of process that is much longer than what you need to do. You can do all this very easily through the Department of Education's website, all on your own, and it does not come with a cost. And so after you submit your consolidation application, you may also receive communications from a student loan servicer called Aidvantage. This is the student loan servicer that has been contracted to process consolidation applications. This is separate from Mohila, who has been tasked to do public service loan forgiveness. But after your consolidation application has been processed, your account then will be assigned to Mohila. Thus, then your loans will be transferred to Mohila once after that. And again, as I mentioned, you may be contacted by private companies that may offer to help you consolidate your loans for a fee. Again, these organizations and companies have no affiliation with the U.S. Department of Education or the Department of Education's federal student loan servicers that specifically contracted to manage student loans. So again, our biggest situation of what we recommend folks to do is to refer to information either provided by NEA or the Department of Education and consolidate your loans on the Department of Education's website.
Okay, Ronnie, so we've also heard a lot about meeting this 120 payment threshold, and that often brings up the question, do those 120 payments have to be made consecutively month after month, or can there be a break in the interim?
Fantastic question. And so the years do not have to be consecutive, or the months don't have to be consecutive either. You can fulfill 120 payments or your 10 years of service in non-consecutive manner. You just must be working full-time for a qualifying employer for a total of 120 months, but those months do not have to be consecutive. So if you've been working in public service for longer than 10 years, or may have taken a break, moved on, and returned back to public service, PSLF still may qualify for you.
Great.
Scott,
And
did you have something you want to raise?
Yeah, so hi everyone, this is Scott. I work the team answering the questions behind the scenes. For the panelists, I just have to jump in just to make sure that when you're responding to someone, please make sure that you actually hit submit and don't just hit return. We have several questions that are sort of have multiple people responding to them, and I just want to make sure that everyone is getting those things answered. So just make sure of that. So just to the team on the backside. So be patient with us as we get through. The questions are coming in hot and heavy. So thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Scott. And
Thank you
again to the MB team for doing this. I'm seeing the numbers being being lowered very quickly. So you guys are doing a wonderful job right there. Okay, let's move on.
Great. So paying multiple student loans can be really complicated. Sometimes there's different servicers. We've heard a lot of different names already. How can someone tell who their current servicer is?
Yes, so this is actually pretty simple. And as I mentioned beforehand, so federal student loan servicers are the companies that have been specifically contracted by the U.S. Department of Education to oversee repayment of your student loans and other different types of federal student loan programs, such as the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Again, these are commonly the servicers that you have an account with, that you're making your monthly loan payments to, that you have an internet portal very similar to maybe your mortgage or maybe something else like your credit card statement. That's the more normal website that you're more broadly accustomed to. So we want to make that distinction between the federal student aid account and also your servicer. But again, these are the companies specifically contracted by the Department of Education to service your student loans and administer the programs. So there are many different types of servicers within the Department of Education's contractual obligations. These include places like Fed Loan Servicing or FIA, Mohila, Aidvantage, Navient, HESC, Ed Financial, Nelnet, Great Lakes, and many others. So those may be all familiar names to you guys. We always get a common question about like, I don't know if my federal student loans qualify because I'm under Navient. Again, those are your federal student loan servicers. So that is not directly tied to your student loans. But again, those are just some names that we want to put out there. And these again are companies that oversee your student loans.
Great. Well, Ronnie, you mentioned an issue with Fed loans and how it's moving away from Fed loans as the servicer for the PSLF program. How will this shift away from Fed loan affect someone's application?
Yes, so Fed loan up until this coming July, they had been the direct student loan servicer that was tasked by the Department of Education to administer the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. That had lasted from 2017 when I first mentioned to y'all when the program first took applications all the way to currently today. That contract is coming to an end. Fed Loan right now is still in charge of processing PSLF applications, but that will end officially as of July 1st, 2022. So that is coming in less than a week, and we will be transitioning to a different servicer, which is Mohila, that I mentioned earlier. So Mohila will be administering the future of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. They will be approving programs and reviewing applications. Some folks may have already been noticing that their accounts have already been transferred to Mohila for that purpose, because you may have applied for Public Service Loan Forgiveness previously. And so by doing that, that announces your intent of pursuing Public Service Loan Forgiveness. And so Mohila and Fed Loans have been automating that process by transferring some accounts over, which is why that has been occurring these last couple of months, if you've noticed that. And that's why you may be making payments to Mohila instead. So again, if your student loans haven't been transferred though, then this will be done automatically for the remainder of this year. And a lot of them will start happening in July once Mohila officially completely takes over the PSLF program and starts reviewing applications. And again, I know we're beating a drum on this, but please read the instructions provided by studentaid.gov and the Department of Education, just to make sure that when you're submitting applications for PSLF, just make sure you're reading the fine print that is provided by anything from the Department of Education's website or their tools, because those things will also be updated to reflect Mohila's transition as well.
Great. And I see that Scott's hand is up. I don't know if that's a residual hand from before or if Scott has a new question.
Residual hand, sorry.
All right, no problem. All right, we get a lot of questions about Parent Plus loans. Ronnie, can you tell us whether these loans qualify for PSLF?
Yep. So Parent Plus loans in the most scheme of things do not qualify for Public Service Loan Forgiveness. And that is because when they first created the intent of the PSLF program, they were meant to forgive the student debt of those directly of what loans that they hold of the public servant. So the loans that the public servant used for themselves, not to their dependents that may be under this. And we know that's a big issue, obviously, because a lot of folks are having issues with affording for college nowadays because of the college affordability crisis and rising rates of tuition. So we completely recognize, obviously, the dire need of that. But in the most general scheme of things, Parent Plus loans do not qualify under the PSLF program. However, there is some caveats to this. Future payments on Parent Plus loans can count for PSLF if the parent consolidates those loans, then re-enrolls into an income-driven repayment plan. The big thing about this is that Parent Plus loans, and the most complicated way to explain it, is that they don't have IDR plans that are associated with them. So Repay, Pay, IDR, ICR, all those payment plans that I mentioned earlier that are income-driven repayment plans, those aren't available to Parent Plus loans. That is why they don't qualify for public service loan forgiveness. But as I mentioned there, and as the bullet says, you can consolidate those and then re-enroll the consolidated loan into an income-driven repayment plan, into the 4 options that I mentioned earlier, into income contingent repayment plan, and that will qualify for public service loan forgiveness for the future. Now, how does that reflect to the limited waiver? So the limited waiver may be granting previous payment credits that may have not previously counted, but pre-consolidation payments on Parent Plus loans do not count towards PSLF credit. And again, part of that is the caveat is that of the complicated process of what Parent Plus loans are, and that PSLF is meant to forgive the student debt of the public servant, not of their dependents.
Okay. We have a lot of people on the line, a lot of people holding different jobs. How does one tell if their job qualifies for PSLF?
Yep. So again, as I mentioned earlier, it is not about your job title, about whether you qualify for PSLF. As long as you work full-time for a qualifying employer, which again includes majority of the public school districts in the United States, their public school districts qualify because they are a government entity, either by the local, state, or federal government, or a 501c3 nonprofit, or some other nonprofit organizations such as higher education institutions and colleges. All of those qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So again, if you're an education support professional, say that you're an ESP, that you're a counselor, say that you are front office admin staff, say you're a school nurse, custodial staff, school bus driver, all those folks qualify for public service loan forgiveness because it is about who you work for, not about your job title. As long as you work full-time for a public school district or higher ed university, you will qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And I also mentioned community colleges too. I meant higher education universities, but I also want to make sure I designated that caveat too.
Okay. We get questions about Title I teachers and a more limited form of forgiveness and whether they have to work in a Title I school. Can you address those questions with respect to PSLF?
Yes, Jeff, this is a great question. This is a very, very common one that we always get. And PSLF is not only available to those in Title I schools, it is available to all educators and all public servants that work in a public service entity, like the school districts, like a higher education university. Title I schools only matter as a designation for a program called Teacher Loan Forgiveness that only applies to teachers that work in a Title I school. And Teacher Loan Forgiveness only provides limited forgiveness and only provides roughly at most $17,500 in forgiveness for your student loans, and they have to work consecutive in 5 years at a Title I school. So PSLF is a distinct separate program from Teacher Loan Forgiveness and does not, again, require you to work at a Title I school. Again, PSLF is for all public service workers and forgives all of your remaining student debt once you meet the 2 requirements of working 10 years in public service and making 120 payments on your federal student loans.
And so does that mean that someone who has already received teacher loan forgiveness is out of luck, or do they still qualify for PSLF?
So this is a really great question too as well, because previously we had a lot of issues with this. There was an issue in a provision when Congress first created PSLF where it didn't allow double dipping in both teacher loan forgiveness or PSLF. So say I was an educator of 10 years in public service, and my first 5 years I worked at a Title I school, and I used those 5 years to qualify for teacher loan forgiveness and took my $17,500 in forgiveness. Though for that reason, I don't get those 5 years for public service loan forgiveness because of those previous rules. But Right now, because of the limited waiver, those 5 years under teacher loan forgiveness does count. So if I was an educator under that situation that I did take teacher loan forgiveness, I will be able to use those 5 years that I used for teacher loan forgiveness towards my PSLF credit, which is really fantastic. We have a lot of success stories thanks to this. This was something that wasn't instituted at the beginning of the waiver. This was instituted roughly around January, about 3 months after it was instituted. So it happened a little bit later, and it was an amendment to what the Biden administration did. And this was large in part, again, to the advocacy of the NEA to help make this change happen, to make these changes happen in an ongoing process with the limited waiver. So again, same as other situations, we encourage you, if you've taken teacher loan forgiveness and you want to seek PSLF, you should also apply again before October 31st. Otherwise, we will be reverting back to the old program's guidelines, which will then disqualify those 5 years that you use for teacher loan forgiveness, and you won't be able to use those for PSLF and need to take roughly 15 years at the minimum to go receive both successfully. If you are somebody who took teacher loan forgiveness and would like to seek PSLF, you may need to resubmit a PSLF application just to recertify your employment for the years that you used to receive teacher loan forgiveness. That is something that is essential, and you may need to go redo in this time frame. But the short answer is that yes, you can still receive PSLF even if you receive teacher loan forgiveness. But again, the vital information is that you do it before October 31st, before the old guidelines come back.
Okay, thank you. So the many types of loans you've already been discussing. There's direct subsidized, there's direct unsubsidized, there's FEL and Perkins and Parent Plus, and varying rules that apply to different types of loans. So how does one tell what type of loan they have?
Yep, also excellent question. As I mentioned earlier, these again aren't the servicers that you're with, but they're different types of loans that you may be able to find on your record. You may be able to find this on your servicer's website that you use to make your student loan payments, and also the FSA account website that I mentioned earlier. The FSA ID login that I mentioned earlier is probably the easiest way you can do it. You can go to studentaid.gov/aid-summary/ to find out what type of federal student loan that you have. After logging in, you can scroll down to the loan breakdown section where there will be a list of each type of student loan that you have taken out. And again, as Jeff mentioned, they'll have the different lists of what you said about whether it's direct, unsubsidized, subsidized loans, and so forth. You can expand that window by clicking View Loans and then clicking View Loan Details, arrow next to that loan. And then this will again provide you the specific loan type. The 3 types of student loans that we want you to focus on, don't focus on whether they're unsubsidized or subsidized loans. That doesn't really matter in terms of whether they're eligible for forgiveness. The keywords that lead to it are much more important. So again, direct loans will begin with the word direct. Federal family education loans are indicated by FEL. And Perkins loans include the word Perkins in their name. And FEL and Perkins loans, again, have to be consolidated before you apply for PSLF because those aren't eligible for forgiveness. Only direct loans are. And consolidation turns your loans into a consolidated direct loan, which therefore makes it eligible for forgiveness. So again, if you have FEL or Perkins loans, that is your designee, and using this way to know whether you need to consolidate or not. And if you don't, you can apply for forgiveness just with the direct loans that you have.
Okay. We hear stories all the time, and we know well that many of our members have loans from many years ago. And that brings up the question of, does the age of the loan matter, or when the loan was dispersed, does that matter for purposes of PSLF?
No, simply put, the loan age doesn't really matter. The biggest thing is that it's never really mattered for the PSLF program, even before the limited waiver. The loans can be as old as time because they can always be consolidated into a federal direct loan. What's key again is the type of loan that you have. So if they're not a direct loan, you have to consolidate again to make sure they qualify. Loan ages, but the key thing though is about when payments were made. So because PSLF was created back in 2007, only payments made on or after October 1st of 2007 qualify towards the 100 payment requirements. Again, this is true under both the limited waiver and also the normal PSLF requirements. Under the limited waiver, if you weren't enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, those payments, as long as you made them after October 1st, 2007, those will qualify under the limited waiver towards your 120 count. So again, loan payments made after that date is what matters, but the age of the loan itself doesn't matter. So say that you took out a loan in 1998, and you've been making payments ever since up until this point in 2022, The payments that will only count to it count after October 1st, 2007, but the age of that loan being older than 2007 doesn't disqualify. It's just the payments of how it counts towards your progress towards PSLF. Loan age, however, does matter for teacher loan forgiveness, that separate program that I mentioned earlier. Loans of that program cannot be older than October 1st, 1998. That is a common issue that we get from a lot of members that are trying to receive loan forgiveness. And it turns out it's because they're trying to enroll in teacher loan forgiveness and not PSLF. So again, if you're applying for PSLF, the loan age has never mattered.
Okay, well, that does it for our kind of 11 questions that we had put in the invitation to the webinar. And I'm going to invite my wonderful colleague Laura Petty to come on, and there she is, and she's going to help walk us through some live Q&As. Take it away, Laura.
Hey everyone. So I've been monitoring your great questions in the chat, and I also had the chance to look through the questions that some of you submitted through the registration link. And so like Ronnie was mentioning before, I'm going to do a fire round live with Jeff and Ronnie, really focusing on the questions that we can answer quickly and that will be helpful to a lot of people. So like Ronnie mentioned earlier, the questions that are more specific or more complicated or unique to your particular situation, we're going to offer you instructions at the end of the webinar again about how to get that one-on-one help and support from Savvy if your question hasn't been answered by somebody in the chat already. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start off with this lightning round. Jeff, someone asked, how can I move a privately held student loan to Fed loan?
A privately held loan, unfortunately, you can't move a privately held loan into a direct loan or can't consolidate it. They are ineligible for PSLF. Now that doesn't apply to Fed loans and Perkins loans, as Ronnie has already discussed, but with privately held loans, they are not going to be eligible for the program.
That's right. Unfortunately, privately held loans are not eligible for PSLF. If you log into mystudentaid.gov and you see your loans there, then those are federal loans and they qualify for PSLF. Thank you, Jeff. Okay. And I actually just saw a great one from Lisa, who asked, would it be best to wait until after July 1st to send in the PSLF form to Mohila? Since of course, Mohila is going to become the new servicer of PSLF forms. Lisa, it's a great question. We actually asked our friends at the Department of Education this exact question last week, and they told us, no, continue to submit your PSLF application forms to Fed Loan Servicing until their website says otherwise. Great question, Lisa. Okay, Ronnie, I'm going to throw the next one at you. Someone asked, is loan forgiveness available for loans used to earn advanced degrees in education?
So simple answer, the type of loan or for whatever degree you're trying to receive, whether it's a bachelor's, master's, or doctorate, all of them are eligible for forgiveness under PSLF as long as they are a federal student loan, as we mentioned earlier. Private student loans don't qualify for the program. So it doesn't matter when you used it or what type of loan you took out from the federal government towards a different type of education, maybe a master's degree that you approach later on in your career versus the private or versus the bachelor's degree loans that you used out. All of those qualify for PSLF as long as they are federal student loans.
Yes, thank you, Ronnie. And I saw a lot of other folks asking in the chat questions like that about whether their grad school loans counted. As long as your loans are federal loans, they count. Okay, Jeff, I just saw this one in the chat that I'm going to throw at you. Harmon asks, if my loan is not in an income-driven repayment plan, is there any way to qualify for PSLF?
Yes, there absolutely is. And the answer is to consolidate before October 31, 2022. This is something that has a temporary fix under the limited waiver that makes sure that you will receive credit for payments that you made in the past, even if they were not on an income-driven payment plan, as long as you apply by October 31, 2021, or 2022, excuse me, that they will then qualify.
Thank you, Jeff. And I just saw another question in the chat, good for clarification. And I'm going to throw this one at you, Ronnie. Someone asked, what does it mean to quote unquote apply for the waiver? I applied for PSLF years ago. Is that the same thing? So just to clarify what I think this question is asking, what if somebody applied for PSLF or submitted a PSLF form many years ago? Should they do anything now before the Biden limited waiver ends on October 31st?
Yes, when in doubt, if you're unsure, file a public service loan forgiveness application. Simple as that. That'll make sure the Department of Education has the most current information on your employment date and also the payment count that you're looking towards that 120 for PSLF. And again, that will also let you take advantage of things from the limited waiver for the PSLF, for credit to PSLF. So even if you applied, say, 5 years ago, and you weren't successful for forgiveness, it doesn't do any harm to go try again right now. And at the very least, even if it doesn't put you into the range to 120 payments or 10 years of service, it will still bump you to all the credit that Jeff mentioned earlier about crediting different payment counts or different payment plans that may have not qualified beforehand. That's what the limited waiver is here for. That's how it's going to propel you into the best situation forward so that you want to receive PSLF ahead. A lot of folks apply for PSLF gradually. They apply every single year. That's because part of the application is certifying your employment. And certifying your employment is how they make sure that you're working for a public service employer. So if there's gaps in your employment record based on your FSA website or whatever you're looking at from your servicer, filing a PSLF application allows them to help fill those gaps of where your employment records are. And that'll give them, again, the most up-to-date information to provide you your progress and for credit for forgiveness.
Thank you, Ronnie.
I'd like to throw in 2 cents on that. I think part of the problem with this is how we talk about this as an application or applying, but really it's you get yourself into the system indicating that you're participating in this program. And then at times you kind of are updating that by providing additional information. So when we say apply, we're not only referring to the initial application that may at the time be denied. It may be denied because you're not yet at your payment count, but it will continue to accrue as you continue to certify your employment and continue to make payments. So understand that really what you're doing is you're submitting this form again and again to update information if you change jobs, et cetera. It's that ongoing process that you're kind of building the data you're providing until you meet all eligibility requirements.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Jeff. And so that's what we mean when we say the PSLF form or the PSLF application form. And just to be clear here, as we've talked about, the rules, the Biden administration has changed the rules for PSLF for 1 year only. And that 1 year ends on October 31st, 2022. If you have not submitted a PSLF form sometime in the past or since October 2021, we recommend that you submit a PSLF form before October 31st, 2022, sometime within this limited waiver year window. And that's just to make sure that that you're going to get all of the benefits that you might be eligible for your PSLF forgiveness today or for your PSLF one day. So if in doubt, submit the form. It doesn't hurt to submit the form. Okay. So the next question that I want to run to, I'll just answer very quickly, which is somebody asked about graduate plus loans, consolidated, subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans. All of those loans say direct at the front of them. If your loans say direct at the front, when you log into studentaid.gov, then those loans are direct. And I think Ronnie and Jeff already covered this, but just to reiterate, all of those are different kinds of direct loans. Okay, so now we're going to get into a couple of questions about consolidation. Jeff, I'm going to throw this one at you. Somebody asked, will consolidating loans forfeit forgiveness?
A very good and very important question. The answer right now is no. The answer for before and after the waiver is yes, in a sense. If by forfeiting you mean it will bring your payment count down to 0. So you have 2 different loans, for instance, one with 55 qualifying payments, one with 75 qualifying payments. You consolidate them outside of the limited waiver period. It will restart your clock. And that's obviously a terrible result. During the limited waiver, that is not the case. There's also the added benefit during the limited waiver of by consolidating your loans, you will get credit for the highest payment count for the product at the end, for the consolidated loan. So out of that 75 and 55 loan payments, both loans will be consolidated and they'll be sitting at 75 payments. So it's kind of a double benefit there. If you wait until after October 31, 2022, if you consolidate, not only will you not get that higher amount, it will reset to zero. So again, this is why we cannot emphasize enough the importance of determining whether you need to consolidate your loan and consolidating your loan if there's any possibility that's necessary to do so while the limited waiver is in effect.
That's right, Jeff. And just to add on to that, if you have FEL or Perkins loans, it's really important that you consolidate those, and you want to receive PSLF, it's really important that you consolidate those loans and then submit a PSLF form before October 31st. Because like Jeff said, if you do that after October 31st, your clock resets to zero. But if you do it before October 31st, then you get credit for all the payments you made while you were working full-time for a qualifying employer. And so just to hit this one more time, because I know it's really scary for a lot of folks, Neil had asked, I already made 10 years of payments, did not qualify after the fact because they were not consolidated under the wrong program, under the right program. I simply want now in writing verification from DOE that I can consolidate. How do I get this verification? And Neil, it's a really good question. I understand why a lot of folks are nervous about it. I shared with you a link and a quote from the website from studentaid.gov. And that's the best answer we're going to get at the time, at the moment, is what the studentaid.gov website says. But I assure you that Jeff and Ronnie and I have been helping other folks, and the folks at Savvy have been helping other borrowers go through the consolidation process and reapply for PSLF. And as long as you do that before October 31st, you are good to go. Your payment count will not restart. So I'm going to throw this next one to Ronnie. Ronnie, Cindy says, my count in February, I got an updated PSLF count in February, but since have consolidated 7 loans into 2, and now it says that I have no qualifying payments. Do I need to resend the PSLF form?
Yes, simple answer is that you do need to resubmit a PSLF form anytime you consolidate your loans. Please make sure you submit a PSLF form that will provide you the most updated count. So Cindy, beforehand, when you got those counts for those 7 different pre-consolidated loans, you probably had a different payment count for all those different types of loans. They probably all didn't equate to the same number. Now that you consolidated under the limited waiver right now, that will grant you the highest payment count that was granted to you based on those, for all those loans into those 2. So say that you had those 7 loans and your highest payment count was 70, your count should be roughly around there now that you consolidated once you apply for PSLF again. But again, as Laura iterated, you have to do this before October 31st, because otherwise we're going to have that same issue about consolidation resetting your payment count to 0. So please make sure you apply again for PSLF before October 31st. I know it's also taking a lot of time for folks to get answers about where they are on PSLF with their application being processed. And as you can imagine, it's because they have record number applications for PSLF right now. There's 130,000 folks that have already received PSLF in some way or have advanced further in their process for PSLF because of the waiver. And because of that success, it is demonstrating that many other folks in America are trying to do the same thing with the program right now. So as long as you submit an application before October 31st, you will get benefit from the waiver and all the perks associated with it. We cannot stress that enough.
Thank you, Ronnie. Okay, as we're running low on time here, I want to make sure that we get a question answered about forbearance. So I'm going to throw this one at Jeff. Jeff, someone asked, how can I get forbearance or deferment periods counted as payments for PSLF? I felt like I was never educated on my other options. Okay, take it away, Jeff.
Yeah, it's a great question. I get asked this I've been asked this by neighbors, by family, by folks at work, right? Like I had to go into periods of forbearance or deferment. I called up my lender and next thing you know, I didn't have to make payments for a year but I either didn't know I could go on an income plan and pay nothing or next to nothing, which would have been a better option because periods of forbearance and deferment do not count for PSLF purposes. But had they gone onto, for instance, an income-driven repayment plan when they were in a period of lower income employment, they may have been able to afford those payments and gotten the credit. Until a few months ago, the answer would have been, unfortunately, you cannot receive credit for those periods of time. The Department of Education, with a lot of urging from advocates, including NEA, has implemented a change to this that we're very thankful for, and it will give some credit for periods of deferment or forbearance as an acknowledgement that many people were steered by their servicers into these positions. It was better for servicers to put you into forbearance and allow interest to continue to accrue rather than to work with you for the more complicated and more, for the borrower, satisfying option in many cases of going on a low payment income driven repayment plan. So what does that mean? It means that it's very complicated to figure out on a case by case basis when someone may have been steered into forbearance or deferment. So the Department of Education came up with a presumption, and the presumption is if you were in one of these periods, your loans were in forbearance for more than 12 consecutive months, then that was not appropriate, and you should be receiving credit for those periods as qualifying payments against your 120 payment count. Or if you were in forbearance for more than 36 months cumulatively, with breaks where you made a few payments, then went back into forbearance, back and forth, and it exceeded 36 months. Once again, this was not an appropriate avenue for loan servicers to take. So you will get credit for those 36 plus months. So that's the presumption. However, we know that other people were in fact steered into forbearance or deferment for shorter periods of time. If that's the case, it requires a little more, requires some individual work on the borrower's behalf. And what folks can do is they can go to studentaid.gov, where we've referred to too many times this evening, studentaid.gov/feedback. There is an option for submitting a complaint. A complaint's kind of a bit of a misnomer here, but think of it as a complaint that you were steered into forbearance or deferment and you want those periods counted for purposes of PSLF. And it requires some individual lifting of describing what had happened to you. There will be some type of analysis of the information that you provide. We anticipate that will take a long time, but there is that recourse to try to obtain qualifying payment credit for those for periods of time shorter than the 12-month/36-month presumption.
Thank you, Jeff. So again, if you were in forbearance for more than 12 months in a row or 36 months total, you don't need to do anything. You should get credit for those months. If you were in forbearance for periods that were less than that, then like Jeff said, you've got to file a complaint with the ombudsman. And we have instructions for how to do that and can offer help and support with that through Savvy and through the NEA website. Okay, so we're just going to do so 3 final quick fire questions before we get to our closing. The first one I just wanted to address quickly. Tanika asked in the chat, I completed the consolidation application online, but I selected Great Lakes as a servicer. Can I change my servicer? Tanika, what you'll have to do is you'll have to wait until the consolidation application is complete, and then you're going to have to submit a PSLF form to Fed Loan Servicing or to Mohila if they've switched over at that point, and then you'll get switched over to the right servicer. Okay, Jeff and Ronnie, yes or no questions coming to you at the very end. One question for Jeff. I've been denied several times, even though several times for PSLF over the years, even though I met the requirements. Should I apply again?
Yes, you should apply again. You may have failed to meet technical requirements, or there may have been an error made, but by reapplying now, you'll benefit from the limited waiver. And if there were prior errors in processing your application, hopefully they will be corrected at this time.
Okay, Ronnie, yes or no question for you. Do the months since the COVID pandemic payment pause count towards PSLF?
Yes, simple answer is yes. Those months do count. So since the payment pause that started back in March 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, all those months, even if you haven't been making actual payments on your student loans, those count as credit for PSLF. So at least right now, we're probably around a little over 2 years worth of payments being credited thanks to the payment pause.
Thank you both. So if we just wanted to close with a couple final questions. One is somebody asked, where's the PSLF form and where do I find it? So Jeff, if you don't mind pulling it up really fast, and I'll turn it over to Ronnie.
Awesome. Yeah, so the PSLF form looks like this. It's called the PSLF and Temporary Expanded PSLF Certification and Application Form. This is what you would look at if you were to file the PSLF form by hand, or this is what prints out at the very end that pre-fills for you. So when you go through the PSLF help tool on the Department of Education's website that we mentioned earlier, you enter all that information in, it will pre-populate this form for you. The big thing obviously is that there does have an employer portion. That's the employer certification portion that I mentioned earlier. It's section 4. It's very hard to read right now on our image, but it's the bottom of the right page. That portion will have to be filled out by your employer with usually a person in your HR department is somebody that is best to do that. But again, this is the form that we're talking about when we're talking about the application or employment certification form. This is what we're looking at. And again, you can fill this out by hand. There's a PDF available by the Department of Education website. But the easiest thing we tell people to do is use the PSLF help tool that will pre-populate this form for you, or also use the Savvy tool at NEA Member Benefits' website to help you fill out this form and help you get this verified by your employer. And then once that is all done, they'll ship it off to the Department of Education, the servicer, whether it's FedLoan or Mohila, who is addressing these applications. And then after that, that is how the processing happens with the application. And again, please make sure you submit these forms before October 31st to take advantage of the limited waiver.
And Ronnie, a quick final yes or no question. If I've worked for multiple qualifying employers over the years, do I need to submit a different form for each of the employers that I've had?
Yes, that's correct. So say you've moved school districts or moved to a different school, or maybe moved into higher education or moved to a nonprofit or nonprofit to a school, you do need to submit an employer certification form and PSLF application for every single employer that you worked with, because that is how, again, they verify your employment. So that involves a different HR department or different employer to fill out that section 4 portion of the form. So it seems really complicated, but it kind of makes sense, right? Because you can't expect school district A to verify your employment for school district B's service. So that's why you have to fill out multiple application forms for that. But again, when you're doing the PSLF help tool, they will pre-populate those forms for you, and Savvy will do the same thing for you so that you have multiple forms for every employer that you have to submit your application.
Yes, thank you, Ronnie. And section 7 of this form actually provides for you instructions on how to submit it. And just to reiterate one last time, one of these forms for every qualifying employer you've had before October 31st. That's the magic date.
And sorry to interrupt you there, Laura. There is a process we've gotten some questions about closed employers, or I can't find anyone in my employer because say it was a private school and they closed down. There's a process on the help tool that will help walk you through an alternative means of certifying your employer. But if your employer is still in existence, by far, the easiest and the best way to go about getting it certified is to track down the right person and have them complete the form.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Laura, sorry, I'll add to that. I know we're running close to time. To add to that too, sometimes there are situations when you're using the PSLF help tool that your employer or school district may not show up when you're searching for your employer. That is a common issue that happens to some folks. Majority of school districts shouldn't actually have this problem since they're government entities, but in the very case that does happen, there are also other methods to verify your employment. Like Jeff mentioned, you can use different tax filing codes that will be available from your HR department about how you can verify, such as the EIN number, I should say also as well.
That's right. If you know that your employer is the government or a 501c3 nonprofit, get that form in. Yeah. Okay, Ronnie, last question for you. What about folks who say they need help getting into the PSLF program and they need some one-on-one support? What should they do?
Yep, as I mentioned earlier, all our NEA members can have one-on-one help and support thanks to our folks at Savvy. Jeff, you can go to the next slide. We'll have it at the very bottom right, or sorry, bottom left. Again, that's neamb.com/Savvy. And again, that takes you to our Student Debt Navigator tool. And there you can get help for applying public service loan forgiveness and have one-on-one support with a Savvy representative if that isn't sufficient enough to answer your questions to help you get through this process. We've had countless of success stories thanks to folks navigating this. We completely recognize, I saw a lot of folks in the chat asking, why is this process so complicated? And you were asking the same questions as all of us are. Us at NEA, we are trying our best to help reform this program to make it as simple as possible. And until then, we have to navigate the program in its complete complexity. That's why we have the Savvy tool, and that's why we have all these resources on the NEA website to help you navigate through this process. That's why we have these webinars to help you through this. We are here as a resource for y'all. But until then, we are still going to continue advocating for reforms to this program so it is simpler in the future. And so folks don't have to struggle through this process like many folks are doing right now. But just to recap for everything here again on the last slide, before October 31st, I know that's ingrained in y'all's heads now, go to studentaid.gov/PSLF. And again, log in with your FSA ID or create one if you haven't had one, and make sure your contact information is up to date, because that is the way the Department of Education will contact you about PSLF. And again, the three-pronged things that if you, depending on your situation, if you have direct loans and have applied for PSLF, you don't need any further action to benefit from the waiver. They are processing your application as long as you've done it before October 31st, and you will get the benefits of the waiver, even if it takes a while. I know the wait times are really, really long right now, and that is because of how well the program is working and how much traffic the application process is getting now because of it. If you have a direct loan but haven't applied for PSLF, again, you should apply immediately, even if you haven't reached 120 payments and 10 years of service, because again, the limited waiver will propel you forward and provide you previous credit of things that you may not have towards getting PSLF on time once you reach 120 payments and 10 years of service. And finally, if you have a FFEL or a Perkins loan, please remember to consolidate into a direct loan, and then after that, apply for PSLF. If you've already consolidated, make sure again you apply before October 31st. That's how you'll get your most updated payment count. They'll propel you in the correct situation forward to get PSLF on time in 10 years and 120 payments of qualifying payments. And again, you can begin your PSLF application by going to studentaid.gov/PSLF to use the PSLF help tool, or to print out the form yourself to enter it manually. Or again, go to our student debt navigator through the Savvy tool at neamb.com/Savvy to use that tool to help you and find a rep to help you to go fill out this application. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. Ended a little bit over, so I apologize for that. But again, the webinar has been recorded, and we will send that recording to all registrants, even if they did not attend live. So you'll have access to this, and you can watch it at any time to go do that. And then any questions that we were unfortunately unable to get during the time of the webinar, we will consolidate those and answer them via a Word document that we'll send out to all recipients, all registrants afterwards, to make sure that folks have the answers to those questions as well. And again, those will be emailed to all registrants. So thanks so much again, everybody. Take care, and thank you for all that you do as our educators for our nation. We really appreciate you. Thanks.